Welcome back to Porterverse Workbench, everyone. This episode will be quite different from previous installments in this series. We'll be covering a model that I've already covered in the past, but the model in question has since been completely redone, that being my model of Porter. Porter's backstory in my AU has already been covered a lot recently in some videos, so we'll skip over it for this video. If you are interested in my Porter AU backstory, feel free to check out a spotlight video on Doc Tank Summer, and also his original model video too. Anyway, so Porter was one of the first models I've ever made. I believe he was in the first batch of 10. I think he was number 12 total. As stated previously, I was practically a baby when it came to my modeling skills in 2022, as that was when I first began modeling in the first place. And at the time, I thought my model Porter was perfect, and he stayed in this condition for a good while. Eventually, in early 2024, I fitted him with some buffers, which did improve the model a bit more. And as time went on, I kept looking back at my Porter model on occasion, and started comparing it to my newer models. And eventually, the comparisons got to me, and I realized it was time for a redo. Officially in the TV series, Porter is based on the Brooklyn Eastern District Terminal engine number 15. This is the same engine that would become the Strasbourg Thomas, but there isn't any model of this engine in HO in either of its conditions. In fact, the only lines that ever made any model of this engine was Lionel, but it was for O gauge. Knowing this back when I originally made this Porter model, I searched for the next best thing. What I originally settled on was the AHM 060 saddle tank engine. It fit the bill very closely for Porter. It wasn't 100% exact, but it was the closest I could find at the time. And that was what I went with. I made the model, and I was happy with it at first. Like I said before, the more I looked at it over time, the more it began to bug me. You see, the AHM tooling for this model is very old, and the age does show. The motor in this model is gigantic, and can be seen bulging from the chassis, which is probably why it's a lot bigger than standard HO scale, which weirdly enough does work in my favor, but we'll get to that in a bit. There was also a lot of open space in the chassis for whatever reason. It just looked like Porter was floating over his own chassis. It's kind of weird looking. And the low-hanging, very skinny front only made the model look even worse. And also, my color mixing was very off from how Porter looks in the series. Originally, my video said I was going for more of a Trackmaster look, but even then I was still way off. And also, the livery itself lacked most of Porter's iconic traits. And so I decided to make a new model for Porter, and I ordered a different model this time. This being the Workbench Spectrum saddle tank. It was very compact, a lot more squat than the original model, and it didn't have any open space in the chassis either. Again, it wasn't 100% exact, but I figured it was a worthy option to choose, and so I ordered it. But when I received it, I could tell something was very off with it. The scaling of the model is very apparent. Porter's CGI model was more than likely modeled after HO scale engines, and is effectively scaled horrendously with the British stock. The Workbench Spectrum model was very small, and it did not look good with any of my British stock. So I went back to the drawing board. For a while I just put the project off for a bit as I worked on other models over time. Eventually I realized that there wouldn't be any other options that would fit the scaling and the preferences I would like for this model. And so I said fuck it and went full on kit bash with this model. Porter's original model was to be completely redone. The plan was simple. Fill in all the empty space in the chassis, chop off the old front and add in a new piece, and then strip off the old paint off the body and apply a new color that was much more accurate. And also actually apply more of the livery traits on Porter's official model. The first part of this project I tackled was the painting. I removed the body from the chassis and had it submerged overnight in 91% isopropyl alcohol. And after about a day or so of being soaked, I scrubbed off the old paint with an old and unused toothbrush. And once all the old paint was removed, I went to priming the body. I waited a little bit before painting as I wanted to make sure the color I mixed was as close to Porter's official color as possible. At first, I looked to see if any companies made any pre-mixed colors that I can just buy ready to go, but I wasn't able to find any at that match specifically. Each one was just a little bit too off. So I had to mix it myself. The recipe I concocted was 1 part Apple Barrel Holly Branch and 1.5 parts Apple Barrel Pewter Gray. The code was officially cracked before my very eyes, and I was really excited now. And once I got this mixture down, I got to painting. After about 3 or 4 coats to make sure it was super even, I did some cleanup work with black and also painted some of the other details. You'll also notice that I fitted a whistle onto Porter's dome. This was from the Blackman Spectrum model, so it didn't go totally to waste. And it was also painted accordingly. The cab design was something I wanted to make sure was done right. Porter's cab has a two-tone look with black on the bottom half and his chevron stripes acting as the border between the green and black. Many realistic Porter models out there emphasize this, and it's a very attractive look. However, I knew these chevron stripes would be way too difficult to paint by hand, so I decided to just keep it simple and have the stripe exclusively wrap around the cab. Following the painting was the chassis work. I took some index card, painted black, and super glued over the open gaps. Once the pieces were painted, they were hardly noticeable. After all that, I chopped off the old front, as it just didn't really look right to me, and went to designing a new front. Porter has a giant buffer beam up front, and I feel that's what makes him so industrial and well blended into the world of Thomas. I simply designed a rectangle piece with a very slight bevel in Tinkercad. Man, it looks really good. I glued it on, and it dried ever so slightly crooked, but I was able to correct this with some sanding and a little bit of shaving. For the buffer beam, I couldn't help but get ahead of myself a little bit by painting it red before adding the buffers. This was when the model really started coming together. The buffers were just simply reused from the old model's condition, and I glued them on, making sure that the height was even with my other British models. I also fitted this vacuum pipe thing I had from an old model detail pack. I can't remember which model this came from, but I never used it on that model in question, and it fit pretty perfectly in here, so I decided it would look good. And I feel this little bit of extra detail adds that bit more charm to this model. I then glued on the loop couplings. After that, I glued on the signature Tugs megaphone, which has basically become a staple of any of my Porterverse models. Following all that was a good matte clear coat, which I originally never applied to the original Porter condition. After about a day of the clear coat drying, Porter was done. I am so happy how he turned out, and he looks so much better than before. I can imagine the before and after looks absolutely insane now. Just quite the glow up. And naturally, since it's also my namesake, this Porter model is not my favorite of the collection. I might also be recency biased, but who cares? He just looks cool. I mean, look at him. He looks so right, you know? And it's also pretty unique. I don't think anyone's ever made like a realistic or really series style model of Porter before. Someone probably has by now somewhere that's not online, but who knows? For those wondering, I am indeed planning on redoing some of my older models. Thomas is going to be the next redo coming up, as he has a new shell coming in, which looks a lot better, in my opinion. I'd also like to redo Henry, as I feel like the current model is too standard looking, as Henry's backstory meant that he will be the most non-standard looking engine of all. The redos in question won't be covered for a long time, however, as there are quite a few models already waiting in the queue for their showcases. So yeah, but I'll still stay tuned for all that. There are lots of plans for Porterverse Workbench in the future. Thank you all very much for watching this episode of Porterverse Workbench, and I shall see you all same time next week.